Shalom Chaverim, and welcome to Treasured Inheritance Ministry for another teaching with me, Aliyah, and it's really good to be back with you all. And today we're going to be talking about something that's very, very specific, something that's very, very important for us right now, something that's very, very important, I believe, on the heart of Yeshua for us. And it's really found in a lot of different scriptures, but we're going to bring it all together. And we're going to be talking about biblical equality from 1 Peter 3. And that's very important because we're going to have a fresh perspective on 1 Peter 3. 1 Peter 3 is a chapter that has really been used and has caused a lot of pain to many different people. It's been something that has been used against women. It's been something that has been used very, very deeply in so many different denominations and congregations and places where people meet together to discuss the word of Yahweh. And it's really been detrimental because there's been a lot of harm that's been done in not understanding what Peter is really saying. But before we get into that, this teaching is really, really going to open up your mind. It's really going to bless your heart and spirit, I believe. If you are seeking for the truth of the scriptures, then this is some truth that you really need to hear. And I'm really, really praying that it will be received with an open heart and that this is going to bless you. But before we get into the teaching and into correctly dividing the word of truth today, let us just close our eyes and pray together. Father, we just are so grateful this evening that we can come before you and that we can receive from your Holy Spirit. We thank you that we do not need to read anything into your word besides what is there, but that, Father, you want us to rightly divide your word of truth by understanding, Father, what is lying deep within the structure, in the pages, in the verses, in the chapters of your holy word, Father. I pray this evening, Father, for those people who are struggling in places, Father, where they have been taught, Father, that they need to just be silent, Father, that they just need to submit, that they just need to obey, even ungodly leadership, that, Father, this truth today is going to set them free. For those who are caught, Father, and who are feeling the pain of living in marriages where there is no honor and love and mutual respect and submission, then, Father, I pray that this is going to be something that's going to bring healing to their hearts, healing to their spirits, and also something that's going to guide and give wisdom to them, Father. I pray such a blessing today, Father, over this, that you will lead and guide, Father, as there is so much to pull out of today, Father, your word. But Father, I pray that you will lead, I pray that you will guide, and Father, I pray that we will just be so hungry and that we will feast in your word, Father, and feast on your word and drink deeply. We thank you, Father. We commit our hearts and lives to you. Flow through this by your grace, that your will be done. We thank you, Father, and we give you all the glory and praise in Yeshua Mashiach's mighty name. Amen. Amen. So, as I said, we're going to be looking at biblical equality, a fresh perspective on 1 Peter chapter 3, and that is what I've called it. And you know what? I really want to encourage you to go. I did a teaching on Abraham and Sarah. 1 Peter 3 is very much about Abraham and Sarah, and I did a teaching on Abraham and Sarah. I really encourage you to go and to listen to that one. You don't have to listen to it first. You can listen to this and then go to that one. But, you know, Abraham and Sarah is very, very special. Their relationship was special. They had a lot of the same character flaws and a lot of the same character strengths. And, you know, the rabbis have always held it to be true that Abraham and Sarah had a relationship of mutuality, a relationship that was based on mutual love, mutual honor, mutual respect. We even see in the teaching I did on Abraham and Sarah how when they arrived at a new place, Abraham would pitch Sarah's tent before his own because her calling and her character and her design and destiny was very, very important to him. And so he always did that. But now we have 1 Peter in 2 Peter 3 here. We will get into how Peter talks about Abraham and Sarah and into looking at what is actually going on. But you know, the rabbis have always held that Abraham and Sarah had a really great relationship. And when you examine their relationship from a really good perspective, that holds very true, that they had a great relationship and it was equal. However, you know, the rabbis didn't have to contend with Peter's first letter that he wrote in chapter 3, which has very odd references to the biblical matriarch Sarah, and to Abraham as well, which really people have taken out of context and understanding. So the question that we need to ask, and what I asked when I looked at this in First Peter chapter 3, is, did Sarah obey Abraham only? I want you just to sit with these questions in your mind when you think about Abraham and Sarah. Maybe you've listened to the teaching on Abraham and Sarah. Maybe you've just read what's in the Torah about them. But did Abraham obey Sarah? That's something that we can ask ourselves. Did he ever obey Sarah? What does Yeshua expect from us in terms of Peter's bold language of Abraham and Sarah? And was Peter actually being humorous in what he was saying? We can't cut out human elements out of what we read in the scriptures. Was he being humorous? What is actually going on? I want you to just hold these questions in your heart, because we're going to explore these issues. We really, really are going to explore these issues. And the truth is that I'm not going to provide you a real extensive exegetical look at the text. I'm not going into the whole book of First Peter, because that will take up way too much time. There are lots of books available for that, but I am going to look very deeply at chapter 3 and how it relates to what we're going to be talking about, which is biblical equality, and how Peter is telling us that we can live in our marriages, in our relationships. So this is very important. And I always say this, and I always stress this, that when you're studying one of the books, particularly of the New Testament, of the Brit Hadashah, it is so important for you to note a few things. And firstly, what we need to note is that the bulk of the books that appear in the New Testament canon were first letters. We so need to remember that. They were very, very firstly letters. They weren't written as books or scrolls. They were written as letters. And these letters were written to congregations or to groups of believers that were addressing certain issues. They were talking about certain things, and we only have one side of a conversation. In other words, many of these letters were actually written to answer certain questions that were being asked of the disciples, or certain things that were happening. And even with Paul, Rav Shaul, he responds to certain things that are being asked of him. However, it is sad because we do not own the initial letters. So sometimes these letters are written to answer questions, and we don't actually own their initial letter. We don't know what was asked. So it's like having one side of a conversation. And that game that you used to play as a child, broken telephone, that rings true here, because we don't actually know what is being asked, so we don't know what is being engaged in. And that is so important for us to know. It also means that we have to know and understand context, because every single letter in the New Testament has a context, and a lot of them are actually just very contextual. They are referring to a certain place, a certain time, a certain situation, and that was the influence of this letter. It is so important, and if you can get that into your mind, you can get that into your heart, wow, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and a lot of misunderstanding of the New Testament. So context is very, very important to gain a correct understanding of any text. We need to ask ourselves with Peter, what is the context of his letter? Who was it written to? What was their context? And who were they, and what were they dealing with at the time? And I'm going to answer those questions for you. So lastly, another vitally important consideration which has to be taken into account when deciphering the letters and the text is, who was the author and what was he or she like? So we know enough about Peter to sketch out his character. His character was inevitably shaped. It shaped how he spoke. It shaped his discourse. So I'm a writer, and I write books. And truthfully and honestly, the way that I write is very different to the way that someone else is going to write. And the way that they write is different to the way that I'm going to write. So you can give us the exact same topic, the exact same heading, and tell us to write about a certain thing. But the way I'm going to write is different, because my makeup is different. My form is different. My intellect is different. My personality is different. My calling is different. So each and every single thing like that influences the way that we write, influences what we say and how we do it. And so who was Peter? What was he really like? And you know Peter probably. We all know Peter. His character is very well defined in the Gospels, and you need to look at his character. So we're not going to sketch Peter's character in this teaching, but we are going to sketch the context. We have to know the context. This is what the context of this letter is. Peter wrote this letter to the believers that were living in the Greco-Roman world. So scholars agree that the purpose of Peter's letter here was to encourage the believers to stand strong in the face of persecution. Persecution was so intense at that time. And at the present time, when Peter penned this letter, the social persecution and unacceptance of their lives, of their faith, of their belief, of their convictions, that was what was facing the believers. Persecution boils down to persecution. So in later years, the Roman government would begin persecuting believers without restraint. Wow, that was what was going to face them in the years to come. But at this stage, we're talking about people who were believers in Messiah Yeshua. Their identity was new, and what they believed was creating issues among their family members and among their friends. So in order to understand Peter's address to the wives and the husbands in chapter 3, we also need to understand what was the context of family life in the Roman world at this stage of our age. So firstly, what is the context of Peter's letter? The context of Peter's letter is persecution. We are dealing with people who have a new identity in Messiah Yeshua, and that they are now facing persecution. There's issues in their homes, there's issues among their friends, there's issues, social unacceptance of what they believe and of what is actually happening. So that's the bigger context of Peter's entire letter of 1 Peter, persecution, and him telling them how to stand firm. Then what we need, if we want to understand chapter 3, we need to understand the context of the Roman world. How did it relate? And I also want to encourage you. We did a radio broadcast last week on the 22nd of January, where we spoke about Ephesians 5 and the context of Ephesians 5 and what the household was like in Greece at the time, in the Greek understanding and way. Because to understand Ephesians 5, you have to understand the household of Greece and the way that the Greeks interacted and what happened. And so here we are dealing with the Roman world, okay? So we need to, again, though, look at the household, because when we talk about husbands and wives and children and slaves and all of those kind of things, we have to look at what is going on with the household. So the household in the Roman world at that time was controlled by what was called the paterfamilias. It literally means head of the home. And the head of the home was, of course, the pater, the man, the husband, the father. Okay, he exercised complete control or dominance over his wives, his slaves, and his children. This is identical to the way that it was in Greece as well. You had a man that was the head of the home. Here in the Roman world, it's called paterfamilias. The head of the home arranged marriages for his daughter. Again, this happened in Greece as well, and often to men who were cruel and unkind, as it was usual practice for Roman men to consort outside of the home. That was just the way that it was. It was a licentious world, and it wasn't a very nice place. If the husband of the wife became unsatisfied with her, he could just literally throw her out of the house without her children, without means of a living, without being able to support herself. The Roman women had no property rights, and they had no right to their own children. Women who were discarded by their husbands often became slaves or prostitutes. This was a big deal. So the situation, closely resembled what we call human trafficking today. You have situations where husbands could sell their wives in order to make a living. It was quite a hard world. Roman women did have a little bit more freedom than Greek women. Roman women could go outside of the home and walk around and go to different places, whereas as the women in Greece were very much confined to the home. But, they had the same situation where they didn't have many rights. Now, in northern Greece, in Macedonia, this is just a little bit of information for you. This is not in our teaching, but in northern Greece, Macedonia, where Paul goes and he meets Lydia, who is sitting on the side of the river, who is teaching the woman on Shabbat. She was in Macedonia. Remember, Paul has that vision where he sees that man of Macedonia crying out, and they travel to Macedonia. In northern Greece, in places like Macedonia, women had a lot more rights. They were a lot more educated. They had businesses, they owned homes, they had a lot bigger legal rights. That's why Lydia was a seller of purple. She was a very wealthy woman, and she had a home. She was basically the head of her home. We don't hear about her husband. We also have other women that are prevalent in the book of Acts in Macedonia. And so that was northern Greece, but this is not our context here. Our context here is women that are subjected to men, and to men that could really break them down and hurt their lives. And there's a quote that I want to say here, and it's by William Webb, and he said that the ancient Near East permitted the sale of girls to any male, whether domestic or foreign, and often for sexual purposes. So in this ancient Near Eastern world, human trafficking was normal. Today we talk about human trafficking, and it is modern day slavery. But we need to remember that human trafficking, the sale of women, even men, because in Rome that was also done, if selling people, it was just normal. And women, they had no human rights, none whatsoever. And the hardships were large, and they were experienced within the household. Wow, that is huge. We need to really think about that. The owner, which is what he was considered, this head of the home, he had full authority over his wives, over his wife, over his children, over his servants, and over his slaves. So when he didn't convert to the Christian faith, which is, I'm using that in the bigger, broad umbrella of what I'm talking about, there was very bad discrimination that would come, and there was very negative economic consequences that would happen, and the security of the household was threatened. And so if a woman, for example, which a lot more women came to faith a lot quicker than a lot of the men did in that context and in that time. And so when a woman came to faith, it was a really big deal, because this man, the husband, he had complete authority over his family. And now you have a woman that's not serving the same God as him, or the gods that he serves of his household. She's now converting to this faith in Yeshua, and it's now resulting in discrimination. It's resulting in economic consequences. It's resulting in all sorts of things. And in these times, it is very, very noteworthy to add that the wives, your wife was expected to worship your God. So they were expected to worship the gods of their husband, and to reject his God would mean that she was rejecting her husband's authority over her and dominance over his family. In the Roman world, belief in Messiah Yeshua and his redemption spread faster among women, and the complications that faith brought with it had to be addressed by Peter. This is the bigger context of what we're going to encounter now as we turn to 1 Peter chapter 3. This is the context. We have women that are rapidly coming to faith in Messiah Yeshua, and it's now rejecting her husband's ultimate authority to worship his gods, to be under his dominance, to do what he says, for him to commit adultery, for him to go outside of the home, for him to traffic her if he's not happy with her, for him to just be involved in sin, in perversities and everything. Imagine this environment, and some people live in this environment today. It's not that it doesn't happen anymore. It still happens, where people are married to unbelievers who are unfaithful and who are abusive, and it is hard, and it is challenging, and it is very intense. So Peter now has to turn and address what is going on. He has to address the household, and that's actually what he's doing in 1 Peter 3. So remember the context. All what I've shared with you now is context. So here we go. We're going to jump right into the text. I don't know why that has just happened on my slide, But if you can just ignore that, we can still see what the scripture says there. It's 1 Peter 3, 1-7. And I'm really sorry about those funny lines, because that didn't happen early on. Okay, so it says this: wives, likewise, be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey their word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear. Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God. For in this manner, in former times, the holy women who trusted in God also adorned themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, whose daughters you are, if you do good and are not afraid with any terror. Husbands, likewise, this is the rest of the text that I didn't put in here. It says, husbands, likewise, dwell with them in understanding, give honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Wow. Sure, this is without proper context and understanding here. This is a terrifying verse. This is really terrifying. And we, as I said already, there is a wider context which we just discussed. So let us just dive so into this. First of all, let us reflect on a woman's dilemma once she accepted Yeshua. Remember, this is the context. So now we're digging into it. What happened when a woman accepted Yeshua and her husband had not, in this particular time where Peter was alive? Okay, and I want to, a lot of this background, I have to use quotations because it's deep historical study. You don't just suck these things out of the air. You've got to go and study it out. So I love what Michael Dinkler said about this, and it says this: the complications involved in a wife's conversion, as well as admonitions to avoid being unequally yoked, may have led some of the women who had now converted into faith to contemplate leaving their unbelieving husbands. That's important. Peter does not advise these women to reject their pagan husbands because he is concerned about the survival of the woman. Remember what I said earlier on. If these women leave, what is their choice? Prostitution and prostitution. There is no other choice. We have a society that is, a woman leaves without any legal right. Even if she owns something, she forfeits it. She doesn't leave with her children. She basically then is going to live a life that is a slave lifestyle. So Peter does not advise her just to reject her pagan husband because he's concerned about her survival of the woman, firstly, but he's also concerned about the salvation of the men in this place. So the husbands are to be won over by the wife's good conduct. So firstly, Peter is concerned about the overall well-being of these women who had converted to faith in Messiah. He is concerned for them because it's like saying just leave your husband and just go and be destitute on the side. The end result will be worse for you. So he's very concerned about her overall well-being once she's converted to Messiah. And he's concerned about the fact that if they left their husbands, there would be no way for them to provide for themselves. Okay? The Roman world was a world of hierarchy, and that's really what we got to understand. The values were in complete contrast to the values of Yahweh's word. Yahweh's word, it actually says there is neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male or female, for we are all one, and we are all the same in Messiah Yeshua. So that's what he says. We're all one, and we're all the same, and we're all equal, and we all have this mutual standing before Abba Father. But in this world, in order to survive in the world that Peter was living in, the world that these people were living in, he tells his readers, act in a certain way so as to navigate through the structure of the world that you are living in. So Peter does not enforce this hierarchy. He doesn't say that it is good. He doesn't say that this is morally good. He doesn't demean it either. He doesn't say, well, it's bad or it's not this or not this. But rather he was seeking out just to aid people as they navigated with newfound faith. And they were also dealing with a large scale of social unacceptance of what they were doing and what they were believing. So Peter understood that there was virtually no chance, which is quite sad, but he really understands at this point that the wives that he was writing to had no chance to have a mutual marriage based on equality and perfect standing before Yahweh. So for them to remain faithful believers and maintain their religious identity as believers in Messiah Yeshua, what Peter is actually saying is quite revolutionary. He's saying that you are going to keep living faith in Messiah Yeshua. You're going to keep on pursuing holiness. You're going to keep on surrendering to Yahweh. You're going to keep on living faith in a home that's unbelieving, in a home which is seen as being quite intense, because you are still rejecting the gods of your husband. You are rejecting his evil works that he may be partaking in. You are rejecting that way of being, but you are still keeping faith in Messiah. So the first 6 verses in 1 Peter 3 are addressed to married women, and that is very important for us to remember. Married women who are living as believers in Rome with an unsaved spouse, so someone that's married to someone that's not saved. These verses focus on offering aid and logical help to saved women who are on treacherous ground once they embraced the God of creation. So instead of the idols of her husband, she had embraced Yahweh, she had embraced Yeshua. And so Peter hopes that as these women live in a wise manner, they still honor the husband, they still respect him, but eventually that these men will be won over to believing in Messiah Yeshua. So in a way, their respect and their honor will protect them, of course, and will protect them, because if they just leave, there's no protection. And he was hoping that the way that they acted and lived would be used as an evangelizing tool, as a way to show that their faith in Messiah Yeshua is so revolutionary, so different, and so living, and so real, so miraculous, so amazing, that it would be used to win over the husband. However, having said that, we need to have caution with this, because Peter's charge to these particular women is contextual. It was relevant to the culture of the time, it was relevant to the context of the time, and it was definitely not fashion to keep women in abusive marriages, because verse 6 says, do not give way to fear. So it's about not giving way to fear, not being fearful, not being in a place of fear, not giving way to fear. In other words, not allowing yourself to be in a place or position of fear where there would be a fearful environment. Do not give way to that environment. Do not do it. So I'm going to really urge caution, because actually recently I'm encountering a lot of negativity, a lot of questions, a lot of things that are happening, and I really believe that to walk in the Ruach is where we need to be. We can't tell every woman, just stay in an abusive marriage, stay in an adulterous marriage, because Peter says that you're going to be like this and like that. I am going to stress and urge caution. And the reason why I'm unpacking 1 Peter 3 is not to tell you how to live this out in your life. I'm unpacking it so that you can see that this doesn't actually apply to everybody. It's contextual. And in Romans 8:14-17, it says, for those who are led by the Spirit of Yahweh are the children of Yahweh. The Spirit you received does not make you slaves so that you live in fear again. Remember that. The Spirit that you received does not want you to live in fear. Rather, the Spirit you received brought about your adoption to sonship. And by that we cry out, Abba Father. The Spirit himself testifies with our spirits that we are Yahweh's children. Now, if we are children, then we are heirs of God, co-heirs with Messiah Yeshua. That word is important. We'll get to it just now. If indeed we share in his sufferings, in order that we may share in his glory. Remember this. We have not been given a spirit of fear. Fear is bondage. And Messiah Yeshua said that he came to set us all free. Everybody who believes in him. Isaiah 61 says that we are free. We are so free. He has proclaimed liberty to the captives. He proclaims liberty to those who are in abusive marriages and in abusive homes. He proclaims liberty. And Peter would have not gone against the teaching of the king by stating that women should stay in a marriage of abuse or adultery and daily live in fear, daily live outside of her destiny, daily live outside of her design. Abuse chips away at the very core of a person's spirit. As readers, we need to understand that contextually, Peter is trying to protect the life of the wife in the Roman Empire at that time. In the way that Rome worked, it was a bad environment. He is trying to protect the life of the wife, and he's trying to bring her husband to faith so that their context could change, so that the household could change and come to a mutual understanding of love. Peter is not actually even addressing abuse in this letter at all. He's simply stating what we know to be true for all believers, and that is that we should all live a holy lifestyle among those who are perishing. And that is what he is saying. Live a holy lifestyle among those who are perishing. Before we move on to Peter's remark about Sarah, I want us to look at something that is mentioned in verse 1. We need to briefly examine this. Again, we spoke about this on the radio broadcast we did on January the 22nd. I really encourage you with Ephesians 5 to go and listen to it. We need to look at this word where he says submit. So Peter says hapattasso to your husbands. The word hapattasso has been a subject of debate for years. And in order to clarify what I presented above, what I said to you above, about the wives and the husbands and the marriage, we need to do a linguistic study of the word. And in everyday Greek lexicons, the word hapattasso has been described as submit. So if you open a lexicon today, that's why lexicons, the Strong's Concordance, it is very good study tools. But we have to go deeper, man. We have to go deeper because new information, new understanding, new truth is coming out every single day. And you know what? The word hapattasso in itself has baffled many people who compile dictionaries. This is the absolute truth. Yes, you can open a lexicon and see it says submit, but does it really mean submit? No, actually it doesn't, because the only way the lexicographers of ancient Greek could understand this word was by looking at the context in which it appeared. So the word in and of itself meant nothing, but they had to look at the context. And that is how we as lexicographers, as people that study languages and compile dictionaries, they have to look at a word. If a word that they could not understand appears somewhere, then the only way to provide an understanding with rare words that appears in old texts is to look at the broader context of where the word is sitting in a sentence, in a letter, in a paragraph. That is also very important for us to understand. So the only way that hapattasso could be understood was in this struggle. We have this struggle that happens, and hapattasso was such a word that people struggled with. And because translators struggled to understand the meaning of the word, this particular word, they looked at the context of the Roman Greek world, which we have just discussed above, and they made their guesses based on what was happening in the world of the Roman Greek culture at that time. And remember what I said to you, the Roman Greek world at that time was a hierarchical structure. It was a place where it was X, Y, and Z. And paterfamilias right at the top, men right at the top, lesser beings were right at the bottom. And due to the fact that women were under the leadership of the paterfamilias, it was really assumed that women belonged to men. Scary. So therefore, hapattasso only had one meaning: submit. So they assumed that hapattasso meant submit only because the context of the world at that stage seemed to indicate that that was true. However, in recent years, a number of Greek papyri, first discovered over 100 years ago, these papyri have been translated. I want to tell you something. It is amazing to see what is happening in the world at the moment. The last 10 years, there's been discoveries about women that are happening continually. I'd say maybe a month to 2 months ago, there was a wine bottle that was discovered in the Judean desert, and it had a little label on it. and it was from a woman to one of the kings of Israel at the time. And so we have this, the archaeologists are going mad about this discovery because it is so very exciting that we have this wine bottle and there's this woman who we don't even know. It doesn't say her name. It just says from your maidservant, kind of like your friend or someone that you know. We don't know how close it was, from me to you. So this woman is sending wine and has wrapped a little gift note on it to one of the kings of Israel at the time. And it's a very special thing that we have found. And over the last 10 years, I want to tell you, discoveries are coming out in Israel all the time about women that are rapidly changing what we understand about women and what we understand about the role that women had and how free they actually were and how high their positions actually were. It is so amazing. So that is why we have to know what we're looking at. We have to know that discoveries are happening all the time. In the last 100 years, these Greek papyri have been discovered, and they've also been translated. And the papyri contained a large amount of factual business data. So that's actually what it was about. And it had stuff in it like who owed who money, how postal transactions worked. But they also throw open an ancient look on the roles of women in the very first congregations of believers, as well as in the synagogues. Because we have Greek words which no one knew the meanings of, and that are now appearing in these papyri, and they're adding new information on the Greek translations of the letters in the New Testament. Isn't that amazing? It's awesome. And one word that was discovered in the papyri is this word hapotasso. It is found there all the time. And while the word hapotasso, as I said, was very rare in literature, that's why these lexicographers didn't know what to do with this word. This word is very common in these papyri that were discovered. Does it occur with the meaning submit? No, it doesn't. And that is fascinating. It actually occurs commonly in the postal documents of these Greek papyri documenting postal transactions. And it actually has the semantic meaning of support, of append, or uphold. So the translation of hapotasso actually does not mean submit. You see, the lexicographers got it wrong. They just assumed that because the context of the Roman Greek world was this hierarchical structure, that hapotasso, especially in the New Testament, must mean submit, but it actually doesn't. And this discovery has told us that it doesn't mean submit, but actually hapotasso means support. And, this idea of wives support your husband changes things dramatically, because you know what, this would fall in line with the understanding of the Ezer Kenegdor. I mentioned this in the radio broadcast. I encourage you to listen to it. Ezer Kenegdor was the help mate, the helper opposite him that Yahweh created for Adam in Genesis chapter 2, and her role was to support, was to guide, was to challenge her husband. And you know what, this idea of support would fall in line with Yahweh's design of woman in Genesis, in the book of Genesis. And so Hebrew thought should always be the basis of our biblical understanding. I need to say that, because Peter was a Hebrew, so his thoughts and his thought patterns would have been Hebraic in nature. He would have had Hebrew thoughts going through his mind, and undoubtedly he was probably thinking of Yahweh's original design. So he was probably thinking about the Ezer in Genesis chapter 2, the woman that supports, and that is really, really special. So when Peter says that a woman should support her husband, he is not suggesting that she is a weak woman who needs to stay at home, who needs to be silent, who exists without purpose or place or destiny, but rather she is a devourer to a Barak. And I'm going to say this so slowly. She is a Devorah to a Barak, a Huldah to a Josiah, an Esther to a Xerxes, a Priscilla to an Apollos. She is a strong woman. She is this one that's equipped to protect, to create boundaries. She guides, she challenges, encourages, nurtures. She holds him accountable. She is so amazing. This amazing design that we are and have been given. And so These women, Devorah, Huldah, Esther, Priscilla, these were women that were called by Yahweh to do what they did. And we need to see that we ourselves are called by Yahweh to do what we are called to do. And in that way, we support and we challenge. And so, it's not about this silence and this confinement, but it's about being tuned in to Yahweh's spirit that he gives us so that we know what we are called to do. So basically, that with this in mind, we need to then fully understand what Peter is hoping for in chapter 3, that through the believing woman and her restoration to who she was created to be by Yeshua, through her salvation, through her oneness with Yeshua, she may be the one to lead her husband through the door of salvation, because that was her original design. When Yahweh created woman, he created her with one definition, and that was Ezer Kenegdo, Adam. Adam, he called her woman, and he called her Chava, he called her Eve. Those were not the two things that Yahweh called us. Yahweh called us the Ezer, and the Ezer, by her unique design, is someone that supported her husband not in weakness but through intense boldness and strength. It requires intense boldness and strength to stand up to someone and to challenge them. It requires intense, boundary settings. To set boundaries requires strength. In everyday marital life, it's sometimes necessary to disagree, to set boundaries, to nullify ungodly expectations, and to help the other individual be all he or she can be and should be. And that is hard. Some people don't want to do that. And in 1 Peter 3, we're dealing with an ungodly husband who believes he's the right of all authority to worship what God he wants. And she is standing, and Peter's saying, support him in doing all these things, setting boundaries, challenging the way that he is doing things. Wow. And you know what? That's pretty tough. It's pretty tough when you're in a position like that. So Peter hopes that by being all that she is called to be, going back to Yahweh's original design of woman, that the wife herself will help her husband be saved. And you know what? That is not an excuse to just sit around and do nothing and just believe that by you just being there that your husband's going to change. No, it means that you do what Yeshua has called you to do. And that is not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy. And I hear a lot of people say, yes, but we're going to stay with our unsaved husbands, and we're just going to be all nice and we're going to be all whatever. That's not what Peter is saying. He's saying, yes, support, but he's saying as your original design, and your original design was set boundaries, support, nullify ungodly expectation, challenge with faith, challenge in love. Do these things because you want the other person to fulfill their destiny in Messiah Yeshua. And so, perhaps Peter was thinking about the old Jewish saying. There's a very old Jewish saying that is very cool. It says this: if an unrighteous man marries a righteous woman, he will become righteous. But if a righteous man marries an unrighteous woman, he will become just as unrighteous as she is. And that is what the rabbis understood to be the influence of a godly woman. So now we need to go on to Abraham and Sarah, because we have to understand Peter's thoughts. We have to understand the context. We've now got the context of 1 Peter 3 from verse 1 to 6. Now we need to look at Abraham and Sarah, because by looking at them, it's so fascinating. So in 1 Peter 3 verse 6, it says, like Sarah who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord, you are her daughters if you do what is right and do not give way to fear. Wow, do not give way to fear again. Throughout the teachings that I did on the life of Abraham and Sarah, I've written 4 articles on the life of Abraham and Sarah. And we have noted in those articles, and I've noted time and time again through those articles, that their marriage, Abraham and Sarah's, as I said right in the beginning, was a marriage of mutual love, submission, support, and perfect equality. It's very cool. Was Sarah, think about it like this. If you read the Torah and you're familiar with Abraham and Sarah's lives in the book of Bereshit, of Genesis, then you need to ask yourself this. Was Sarah the only one that obeyed Abraham, or did they obey one another? Because that's interesting. Okay, so Peter points his readers to what is found in Genesis 18. Okay, that is what he's referencing here. It's in verse 12. It says this. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I not have this pleasure? The word used for Lord in this chapter that she says that Peter is referencing is this word that is common and found. It's actually written here in Genesis in very small letters, so it doesn't have a capital on, and it's the common Hebrew word Adonai, which is what the Jewish people call Yahweh today, Adonai, but with a capital A. But in verse 12 of Genesis 18, it's found in all small letters, and she's calling him Adonai. Now, something needs to be said about that. Firstly, Adonai simply means sir, or it means my master. It was a term of respect in those days. Again, here's some context. It was a term of respect that was used between people, and it was never used to denote a relationship of master, slave, or superior versus inferior. It was never used for that. It was a term of deep respect. And so even in Numbers 12:11, Aaron called Moses Adonai. In Genesis 32:40, Jacob called Esau Adonai. In 1 Samuel 24:8, David called Saul Adonai. And in 2 Kings 8:12, Hazazel, king of Syria, called Elisha, the prophet, Adonai. And so it was this term, like we would say today. We have certain terms for people that are in places of respect to show our respect one to another. So this is what is happening here. Sarah referred to Abraham, her husband, who was her husband, and they were mutually respectful to one another, which was really great to see. She referred to him as Adonai in Genesis, here in this Genesis account, which was a term of great respect. It was a term of honor. And it's very interesting that she mentioned this when she was alone. So, here in Genesis 18 verse 12, she's alone. She's out of earshot, it says. And she says this when she's alone. And by referring to him as such, it did not show that he was superior over her in any way, but it rather showed that she was laughing at this thing of like, oh my goodness, they say that I'm going to have children. This is ridiculous. She also then says he is old and he's worn out, which sounds a bit strange. But she is then saying, I love him and I have respect for him. And so, yes, we're old and we're pretty wrinkly and we probably don't have much hope for procreation, but I love him, and there's this love and respect which goes back and forth in the life of Abraham and Sarah. And so, respect should be present in marriage. It should really be there, and especially within the marriages of believers, respect is vital, vital, vital. So what I said to you was that, did Sarah only obey Abraham, or did Abraham obey Sarah? There is another thing. So we've now covered the fact that of how Sarah referred to Abraham as Adonai. Didn't show that he was master over her, but showed that they were respectful to one another. And so then what Peter refers to is, Sarah obeying Abraham. So we need to look at this, because in opposition we find a very interesting reality in Genesis 21-18. This is important. In verse 3 it says, but Yahweh came to Abraham. Oh golly. Okay, here it says, but God came, sorry, not to Abraham, but God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, indeed, you are a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife. Wow. So we know this story. What happens is that Abraham says to Sarah that you must pretend to be my sister. So otherwise, these guys, they are going to see that you are so beautiful. They're going to see that they want to take you, and then they're going to kill me, and it becomes this whole big deal. So Sarah is then taken by Abimelech and then is living in this place. And Yahweh then comes to Abimelech in a dream by night and says, "You are a dead man because of the woman you have taken, for she is a man's wife." So when we look at the original text of the following verse, it's so interesting. This is the only time in the entire Tanakh where the word Baal appears and is translated as wife. Wow, now listen to this. In fact, the Hebrew word Baal, Baal, it means master or lord. Usually referred to in a man's terms because it's a manly designation. However, in this place, Yahweh himself tells Abimelech that Sarah is Baal to a Baal. If you look at the original Hebrew, it says Sarah is a Baal to a Baal. So she's a Baal to a Baal, which is Abraham. If Yahweh merely wanted to tell Abimelech that Sarah was another man's wife, he would have used the normal Hebrew word Isha, because that's normal for wife, normal for woman. But in this instance, the text, the Torah, there's so many places like this where this happens in the Torah. You've got to have such a sparkly eye to see it. But in this instance, the text tells us that Yahweh referred to Sarah, Yahweh, the king of everything. He refers to Sarah as Abraham's Baal. So this does not mean that Sarah was Lord or master over Abraham. Rather, it showed others, in this case Abimelech and his people, that Sarah herself was a woman of leadership, a woman of strength, together with her husband, who was also a man of strength and who was referred to as a prince among the people. So we can see, wow, this should blow your mind away, because Yahweh is referring to Sarah as a Baal. He's referring to, and it's the only time that this happens to a woman, where a woman is referred to like this. So we need to then say to ourselves, what does Peter mean when he says that Sarah obeyed Abraham? So the use of Sarah as an example of obedience is not without humor. We've got to admit it. There are so many cases where we have this interplay between Sarah and Abraham, and this is actually just quite humorous, really it is. Because in Genesis, Abraham is shown as obeying Sarah just as often as Sarah obeys him. So once it's at Yahweh's request, when he says in Genesis 16 verse 2 and Genesis 21, 11 to 12, Yahweh tells Abraham this: whatever Sarah says to you to do, you do what she tells you to do. You can go and look at those scriptures for yourself. It's very, very interesting. So now it says in verse 6, we have the word obey. And we need to also look at this. In 1 Peter 3 verse 6, we have this word obey. Sarah obeyed Abraham. What is the actual Greek word that is found here? It's the word hupakau. It means to hear, to listen intently, to hearken with stillness and attention, as a doorkeeper would in order to answer. So the action of hearing is something completely different to listening. Hearing occurs when a sound penetrates your eardrum. Then the ear perceives it as a sound, but there is no conscious adherence to the words that are being spoken. That's when you hear something. But when you listen to something, on the other hand, it's when the sound penetrates the eardrum and then you pay conscious attention to the speaker's words. So you know what? Today, many times people hear what other people say, but it's a difference if you're listening. And the word that is used here is the word to hear, to listen intensely. So these words then, if you're listening intensely to someone, these words filter into the brain, they are processed, and then the listener reacts to those words, or they react on the words. So they're reacting either to or on the words. And this is what Peter means when he refers to Sarah in this verse. Sarah listened intently to Abraham and went along with his scheme to deceive Abimelech in Genesis chapter 20. That is what Abraham is saying here. That's what Peter is saying here. Sorry. At Abraham's request, Sarah willingly placed herself in a dangerous situation by living with the pagan king Abimelech. It was pretty dangerous, and it was not really right. It was Yahweh himself who had to intervene to save Sarah. Think about that. And in this way, many scholars comment that Abraham represented a type of unbelieving husband, which was the context of 1 Peter 3. Abraham did not trust Yahweh enough to believe that he would not be killed because of his beautiful wife, Sarah. Instead, he took matters into his own hands, just like Sarah did when she urged her husband to take Hagar as a wife in order to produce an heir. You see, they had very similar character faults, and it's so fascinating when you look at it like that, because they do similar things. But here Abraham represents a type of unbelieving husband, a man that doesn't have faith in God to do all that is necessary to do. And so Sarah did not heed her husband's words in Genesis 20 because they were right, but because she trusted him and she loved him. And it must be assumed, based on the biblical narrative in Genesis 20, that perhaps Sarah was not in complete agreement with Abraham's wishes. We don't know that, but she did go along with them, and we know that Yahweh intervened to save her life. And so this also needs to be said. While Peter mentions Sarah's obedience to Abraham, it's very humorous, as Bill Zekian suggests. Bill Zekian has a great book called Beyond Sex Roles. He suggests that through the stories of Abraham and Sarah, Abraham obeys Sarah's voice several times. Wow. So with that in mind, we really have to think about Peter's context of what he's saying. Because in Genesis 21, Sarah confronted Abraham about Ishmael and Hagar. While Abraham is reluctant to send his beloved son away, Yahweh comforts Abraham by saying, whatever Sarah has said to you, listen, obey to her voice, for in Isaac your seed shall be called. Again, this is not a case of who's in charge. This is about the mutuality of marriage. That I need to really, really stress. Yahweh expects right to be followed in any case, especially marriage. And people are making too many leniencies when it comes to marriage. Too many times people are going, it's marriage, you can't do, Yahweh expects us to follow right, to pursue holiness, to surrender and walk in obedience to his will, to cast the wrong out in every single way. And that includes marriage. And so in this case, Sarah was correct. She was discerning the situation. She wanted to walk in the right thing, and Yahweh wanted her feelings in this case to be followed. Again, if you have a surface reading of 1 Peter chapter 3 here, it would be very, very odd. The outworking of power would be incredibly odd. But the truth is, we always need to have a deeper look at the text. We need to have a deeper look at the context of the biblical references and of the concepts, and we need to go back and forth, because there was a deep love between Sarah and Abraham. And that was what was. And they obey each other. They listen, and when the one is discerning correctly, there is this thing that happens. And so we need to understand that. And I want to just touch on this. 1 Peter 3:8 says, husbands likewise dwell with them, meaning the wives, with understanding. Give honor to your wife as to the weaker vessel, as being heirs together of the grace of life, that your prayers may not be hindered. Peter turned to husbands here. Remember the context of the Roman world this time. A complete authority could send my wife away, could divorce her, could sell her, could traffic her, could get rid of her, could leave her destitute. That was their context. Peter turned to husbands and told them to dwell or live with their wives in understanding. The idea behind this verse is that the husbands that here were in question, that Peter was referring to, they were to live with their wives in an intimacy and in an understanding. And the intimacy that's related here is related back. If we take it back to the Hebrew, it goes to the word yada, which means to know or to have knowledge and to speak of an intimacy. So, an intimacy that is found in marriage, only in marriage. Physical intimacy, spiritual intimacy, soul intimacy. And you know what? Peter is actually saying here, remember what I told you, these men could throw their wives away, and also was very regular for them to consort with prostitutes and to go outside of the home. Peter is actually saying here that these husbands need to live in faithfulness and in loyalty to their wives in intimacy. both physical intimacy, and emotional intimacy. This is crazy. Remember the world that Peter's speaking into. This is a place where men were frequently outside of the marriage. I mean, marriage wasn't about love. It wasn't about faithfulness and all the things that we are supposed to base marriage on. So Peter is telling these husbands, especially those now we have moved to, these are husbands who are now in Messiah. These are husbands that have accepted Yeshua. He is telling these kind of men, this is not unbelieving husbands anymore, this is believing husbands. He's telling them how they are to act. Get rid of that pater familias mindset that you have. It's no longer acceptable. What is acceptable is to be tender-hearted, to be intimate with your wife, to learn to know her in the sacred, holy covenant that marriage continues to be even up until today. And so that is what he is telling them. And that was a big deal. It was a really big deal. It may not seem a big deal to us today because we talk about it all the time, but it was a big deal. What does Peter mean by this? He says that husbands were told to honor their wives as the weaker vessel. This sentence has often been used to teach that women are inferior, okay, in knowledge and in mind and even in body. Okay, so Peter is not saying that. He's not saying that women are weak or inferior or less intellectual. History itself and our present day actually confirms to us that that is not the case. Okay, Peter is not saying that, because rather scholars agree that it's very difficult to determine what was Peter actually saying here, because he uses the Greek word asthenestero, and this word has many different meanings, especially when you take it back to the Hebrew. It's very, very difficult to understand and to determine what this word actually means. So, you know, what the word honor seems to be the word that is implied here. So you're supposed to honor them. You're supposed to show respect to them. And honor is something that Yeshua is restoring to people in the world in this very season and time. The world that we currently live in is a place of dishonor. People are rude. People don't respect each other anymore. People cannot recognize the beauty of someone else when they're good. People push each other in malls, push ahead of people in queues, push each other off the road, force their way through doors. I mean, gone are the days when men bow to women, when women curtsied, and where people, you know, addressed each other with dignity, with honor, with respect. Those days are not here anymore. And you know, Peter is wanting us to remember and to observe this reality of husbands honor your wives with respect. You know, the word that Peter uses as well for honor is timen, which means to respect, to value, to have dignity, to have worth. So husbands are supposed to, you know, really display respect, really display honor, value, dignity, worth. It's really, really a beautiful thing, but it's also a self-sacrificing thing to honor someone else. And you know, Yeshua displayed intense honor for others. When he walked this earth, he touched a leper, he healed a blind man, he set people free. These were miracles of honor. He touched a leper and became unclean. In Mark chapter 1 and 2, we find this leper that Yeshua touches, and he stays out in a desolate place, and people have missed it. He stays out in a desolate place because by touching a leper, he became unclean, but he went that far because the man was an outcast, living in a solitary place and never knew what it really meant to be touched. So he honored the person's worth. He honored the man's dignity. And you know, Ephesians 5 says that husbands ought to love their wives as Messiah Yeshua loved his bride, his congregation, as he loves us. You know, husbands are given frequently throughout the word a very, very intense calling. So Peter tells husbands that they have to honor their wives, they were to encourage them, they were to uplift them, they were to recognize, you know, that she had value, she had worth, and that she had a calling all on her own. And lastly, husbands are reminded by Peter that this is the truth. The wives are heirs together of the grace of Yahweh, so that a husband's prayers are not hindered. That's an interesting one. In contrast to the Roman structure where wives inherited nothing, remember that, husbands were told that in Yahweh's eyes, women were equal to men because they would inherit identical. They would inherit the same lot, the same spiritual inheritance in every way as their husband was exactly what they were going to receive. And it's changing a mindset. Peter's trying to change a mindset here. So men were to remember Peter's command to honor their wives, to love their wives in intimacy, live with them in understanding, commit themselves faithfully to their wives, in this beautiful way, to honor, give her this place. And also, if they did that, then their prayers would not go unanswered. And how beautiful is this reality? So we see honor and beauty and goodness. We see humor. We see Peter trying to protect a woman's life. We see him trying to save people. He's trying to do actually a million things in this one chapter. And so we need to say that if we just take a verse or two from context and we just pull it out and we just say, you know what, woman, you just have to be quiet, you just have to submit, you just have to stay in abusive marriages, you need to this and that, we are going to totally miss and understand the author's meaning. Peter is addressing the issue of persecution and also the persecution that would be present in a marriage when a wife converted to Yeshua, which was happening hugely in that time, and the husbands who were living in that world. His words were impactful. His words were actually quite bold. We don't understand them like that because we don't know the culture. His words were revolutionary. His words were Hebraic in nature. He's trying to teach these women to learn about the Genesis to Ezra. The woman that challenges, the woman that stands, the woman that supports, the woman that upholds, the woman that creates boundaries, the woman that guides. He's trying to set her back up to that. And he's trying to say in everything, if exactly like Ephesians 5 says, everything can be summed up in 2 words, and that is mutual submission. 1 Peter 3:8 says this: finally, all of you should be of one and the same mind, united in spirit, sympathizing with one another, loving each other, as brethren of one household, compassionate and courteous, tender-hearted and humble. With that, having said that, let us close our eyes and pray. Father, we are so grateful this evening that we can dig deep and feel such a relief to know, Father, that you are the God of honor and you are the God of dignity and the God of worth and value, that you say that we have a place in this world and you want us to fulfill it, Father. But Father, I want to pray that we as husbands and wives, Father, that we can love one another in the way that you want us to. Yes, we fall short. Father, we know that we fall short, but help us. Help us establish mutual submission in our homes. Help us heal, Father, in the places where we need the healing. Help us give worth and dignity and to see your image in mirrored in the lives of our family members. Father, thank you so much that you are good and that your kindness endures forever. In Yeshua, we glorify and we honor you. We commit our hearts, we commit our lives to you. And Father, I want to pray a special blessing over each and every single person that is listening, that is not in such a loving marriage, Father. No matter who it is, a husband or a wife today, Father, if their marriage is struggling and this marriage is not in the place where you want it to be, Father, I pray for your wisdom. I pray for your healing. I pray for your goodness. I pray for your grace. And I pray that you will, Father, place your loving arms around that man or woman today, Father, who is desperately seeking an answer to this situation they find themselves in. I pray for a blessing, Father, over that person. And I pray, Father, that we will come to know you in your truth and in your goodness. We thank you so much that we can look into your word, make it real to us, help us receive it, Father, in our deepest spirits. Thank you, Father, how we praise you. Yeshua HaMashiach, we give you all the glory. Amen. Wow, thank you so much for joining me for this teaching today. It has been such a joy actually just to spend this time with you and to share about 1 Peter 3 with you and the context. If you enjoyed this teaching, you are so welcome to get the notes on our website, www.treasuredinheritanceministry.com. There are loads of gender teachings, there are loads of women's teachings, and the notes for these teachings are all on there. I encourage you to get it. Subscribe to the channel. Subscribe to the channel if you want to receive more videos like this and just new teachings. And if you know someone today that is experiencing some sort of hardship or misunderstanding, or they've been taught that they need to be quiet, or their congregation is not living a way of honoring men and women, then I want to encourage you or challenge you to send this teaching to them and for them just to receive truth by hearing Abba Father's pure word. Thank you so much for joining me, and I really pray that Yeshua will bless you. Until next time, Shalom.